very, very welcome on behalf of the Ulster University Business School. The Business School delivers its programmes across all of our campuses, the 4 campuses in Northern Ireland, and also through partnerships that we have in Dublin and London. All that teaching provision that we deliver is top rated according to the National Student Survey in the UK, and we're ranked 7th in the UK for the impact of our research. That's a very important thing for us, so we're not dealing with ivory tower research that isn't relevant to business. We're absolutely immersed in the business world and seeking to draw impact from the research that we do that will allow businesses to think and act in new ways. We're the only business school in the UK with a formal relationship with Harvard Business School and Babson College in Boston. Babson College in Boston is the world's leading centre for entrepreneurial education, and we've just formalised relationships with them and with Harvard in the last few months. Next week, actually, I'm over in Boston with them just to meet them to talk about what we're doing on that. What we're very focused on, and we had a soft launch of some of our programmes last week to an invited audience, is focused on executive education with those partners. And we're very, very committed to increasing, I suppose what you would say would be the leadership capacity within Northern Ireland, but not leadership in the conventional sense of that word in terms of programmes you might have been on. We're very focused on entrepreneurial leadership. So leadership that allows you to identify and convert opportunity in the VUCA environment that we're in at the moment. So I don't know if that's a term, I'm sure many people will be familiar with that. That very volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous environment that we're all facing, the speed at which we're moving, doesn't require a traditional leadership solution, it requires an entrepreneurial one. You didn't come here to hear me. I just want to thank a few people. I want to thank Fergal for the opportunity. This is the 7th time that we've done this, and it's a fantastic event in the business school's calendar. So Fergal, thank you very much. Jerry, thank you for your support every year as well. Can I also thank, hopefully you enjoyed a light breakfast downstairs. That is our Academy restaurant that provides that. One of 6 such institutions across the UK. So that is a teaching restaurant, a training restaurant. So it's commercial, so you can come in and have lunch with your colleagues any day through the semesters that we run. Just Google the Academy Restaurant Belfast. And the food is absolutely superb, as is the service. We have Michael Dean and Niall McKenna, both as visiting professors to that part of our business in the business school. And I'd really encourage you to avail of the opportunity there to come. I have to do a little bit of housekeeping, which I always forget to do, so I'm really proud of myself that I've remembered. We're not expecting any alarms or anything this morning, so if there is a fire alarm that goes off, the exit that you come in is a fire exit, as is this one here. So please exit the building as quickly as you can if alarm does go off. That's really all I want to say. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your support to PKF-FPM, and enjoy the talk this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our special guest this year. Would you please give a big welcome to Padraig McManus. You were saying Belfast has changed since the last time you were here.
Well, I think it's been changing over the last number of years. You know, it's a really lovely city now. It has lost that darkness that it had for so long, and I think it's great. It's great to be in Belfast. Great to walk around Belfast and see so much activity. And it's, you know, you've just been telling me beforehand about the number of new hotels that are to be built as well. Like, so I think all of that activity helps raise the whole spirit of the place. It's a lovely city.
You have a bit of a relationship with Belfast insofar as that your dad was from Burren and your mum was from the Falls Road in Belfast.
Yes.
Did they up sticks and head off to Kildare, and why Kildare, and why did they leave?
Well, I suppose a few steps. You know, my dad went to Queen's and met my mother here in Belfast, and he was working here in Belfast, and then he got a job in CIE in Dublin. So they moved to Dublin, and he didn't spend long there when he moved to the ESB. I think he spent about 2 years in CIE and then moved to ESB, the Electricity Supply Board, and then he got a job in Allen Wood, and the town associated Allen Wood, of course, like most power stations, is in the middle of nowhere.
Yes.
So the town was Nice, that all the people working in it lived, so they moved to Nice. That was around 1958. So my eldest brother and sister were born in Belfast, but the rest of us were born in Dublin. I don't tell people that I was born in Dublin. I'm a Kildare man, Jerry.
So when you were growing up there, you obviously your parents still had family here and relations
Yes.
here. and they were living through the 60s and 70s and all that was going on here. Were you aware of what was happening in Belfast at the time?
Very much, because I suppose because we had family and relations and lots of family. One of them is here. My cousin Anne Marie is over there. So we followed it all the time. Whereas the sad part about, I suppose, living in a place like Kildare is people didn't want to know, and if we, because of being involved in that way, because we had parents from the north, were kind of interested and watched everything. When you spoke to people about it, they just blanked. And I think it was a great pity. But I suppose maybe that's life, isn't it?
What was the early plans for the young Padraig McManus?
Well, I suppose I was good at maths and physics and technical subjects in school, and all schools at that time. I did the Leaving Cert in 1969. They wanted engineers. They wanted their students to do engineering. I think it has probably changed a good bit since. So the school had decided that I was going to be an engineer, and my father had decided I was going to be an engineer.
Because he was an engineer.
Because he was an engineer. So I declared coming up to going to university time that I was going to do law. And first of all, I was called into the principal to be told I wasn't doing law, I was doing engineering. So that's how it happened, Off I went.
So you finished in UCD when?
I finished in UCD 73.
And went straight into ESB?
Straight into ESB.
At what level did you go into ESB?
Well, they took on a lot of graduate engineers, and they weeded them out in the first 2 years, and some were kept and some weren't. And so I stayed in ESB for about 2 years, and then I left and went to work in Germany for a year in a cable manufacturing company. Because it was a company that was doing business with ESB, I had a comeback clause, so I could come back, if I wanted. So I spent a year in Hanover and then came back.
Well, was the ESB job, was it seen as a good, safe job, or did you see it as a place where expertise and talents would be rewarded?
I suppose at that time, employment wasn't great. Like, a lot of my class went to Canada. A lot of my friends, a big group of them went to Calgary. Some came back, but most of them stayed. So, employment opportunities were not great at that time. So ESB was seen as a really good job. It was a technical job, good for engineers, and I suppose, and it was seen as safe as well. And they had a great strategy in ESB that they got young professionals in and they paid them well. And I didn't disabuse them of that strategy when I got to a different level in the organisation.
We'll talk about that later.
They paid them well, got them a mortgage, and then settled them down pay-wise, So.
When you joined ESB in 73, was it still the sole electricity provider in the south?
Yes.
There was no one else was involved at that stage?
Nobody else at that time.
And was it completely state-owned at that stage?
It's still completely state-owned.
So, you come in, how quickly did you move up the ranks?
Well, I suppose when I came back from Germany back into ESB, I was definitely unsettled. And around that time, around the late 70s, ESB had started to get involved in international business. And I suppose that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get out and work in some of the consultancy assignments they had. But I was only in my late 20s, and you had to have grey hair to be treated as a consultant at that time, Jerry, didn't matter what you knew. So I left in around 81 and went to work in Saudi Arabia for about 3 years with an American company. In the same area, if you look at Riyadh now, it's hard to believe that at that time, big parts of the city weren't electrified. So that was a fantastic time and a great learning time as well for me, because we didn't have enough resources, didn't have enough people. There was no such thing as budgets. It was just a question of how fast you could get work done, which was great for engineers. But in terms of how to actually get work done with limited resources, whereas if you're working in a company like ESB, everything had its place. It was a much easier thing. So I think that I suppose I learned a lot from that time. That it doesn't have to be always the way it has always been done.
Yeah.
There are better ways to do things, and I think that's the experience that you get. I think that's part of the difficulty of people who sort of join organisations and stay there for the entire time. They believe that the only way to do things properly is the way that they see it, whereas if they move, then they've great opportunities to see greater challenges as well. And so I came after my time in Saudi Arabia. I came back, and ESB had got really big into the international business at that time. So I rejoined ESB International at that time and started working on a number of projects. And I eventually went to work in Ghana with ESB International.
In Ghana.
In Ghana.
We'll talk about that in a moment. Were you always a very ambitious man?
Yeah, people ask me that. I don't really remember, to tell you nothing but the truth. But what I do remember is that I always wanted to do things well, you know, and I didn't want to leave things, and I wanted to achieve, you know. And later on, I suppose, as I sort of got to different levels, you know, I remember a guy asking in the ESB one time, "What is senior management?" You know, I thought I was senior management, he said. I said, "Senior management is one step above where you currently are." And but as I sort of got to different levels in the organisation, I realised that I could do things better than most people around me.
So was there a point when you realised I could actually run this company?
I wouldn't say that happened until I came back from Ghana. You know, I came back from Ghana, I moved back into the core organisation, and then I was, you know, and I hadn't been working in the core organisation for an ESB since for a long time. And when I went in there, and I sort of looked around and said, you know, I could run this place.
Yeah.
Now, it took a few years after that, you know, but...
How big was ESB at the time?
Well, at that time, probably had about maybe 12,000 people, you know, turning over about maybe 2.5 billion. And...
just in the south of Ireland?
Well, including ESB International.
Yes.
You know, and... well, it had too many people, really, you know, for what was going on, for what was being done. So there was the start of the change process started in around mid-90s, and I was very much involved in that whole process. The first time we sort of said, you know, ESB can't run like this. You know, there's far too many people. Work practices are bad. You know, fitters can't change plugs. And might sound like a simple thing, but it's just a symptom of the kind of thing that happened in big organisations that don't change. And I suppose the momentum for that, because ESB was a heavily unionised organisation, still is. Not that there's anything particularly wrong with that if the relationship is good, but there was it was getting to the time where there was far more competition, and in the United Kingdom, the companies had been privatised, and there was a lot of, you know, competition, and prices didn't come down, but, you know, people felt that there was a better way of doing things, and the government at the time in Ireland had decided to split ESB into two, and the proposition we put to government was, okay, or to the unions was, there are two roads we go down here. You know, they're either going to split the ESB up and all that goes with that, or we make the change ourselves. And actually, some of the unions who had affiliates in the UK came over and said, you know, if you stand in the middle of the road, you'll get hit by a truck.
Yeah.
You know.
Before we get on to tackling the unions, in 29 years after you started in ESB,
yeah,
you got the CEO job.
Yeah.
But 5 years before that, in 1997, you didn't get it.
Well,
didn't you apply for it then?
Yeah, that has been, you know, I never comment on these things really, but the absolute reality is I didn't apply for it then. Now, it has been recorded in, you know, when people used to write about lots of things in the paper about me, mostly about how much I was paid. But, you know, they also said, and he didn't get it in 97 when he went for it, you know. I didn't actually apply for it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So all the newspaper reports are wrong?
Well, in relation to that, yeah. I wouldn't say they were wrong in everything, but
were you?
Would anyone believe what they read in the newspaper anyway, you know? Yeah.
Pension pots? We'll talk about pension pots a little bit later. So what were your priorities in 2002 and 2002 when you got the job?
I suppose what I had learned from my different places that I had been in, you know, I mean, when I was in Ghana, we had virtually no resources, you know, and we'd World Bank money, and we had to deliver a rebuilding of the electricity system. And I learned from that time that, you know, people weren't pushed half hard enough, and that there was a lot more potential in people. And that's what I firmly believe, and is part of what I've always sort of done in places I've been. When we sent people out on jobs in ESB International, First of all, they went to places that didn't have a lot of resources. That's why we were there. And they loved it. And it wasn't the money they got. They generally were getting extra money and tax-free and all that kind of thing. It was the fact that they had more responsibility and that they had clear plans, clear things that they had to deliver. So not alone did they deliver, but they loved doing it. And these were people who came from, places where there was a settled way of doing things. So, when I started out in 2002, my absolute priority was, I believed fully that there was 10% more in every single employee in the company. But if you could extract 5%, imagine the productivity that you would achieve in terms of delivery. Now, one of the big challenges we had back in 2000 was that there had been no investment. The government had capped the price of electricity through the bad times, if you like, we had in the 90s. So the only way you can cap prices in a utility over a long period of time is not to invest. So the network got into a fairly poor state, and it was, people will forget it now, but at that time, that's what the newspapers wrote about, the fact that the network was not reliable. And so what I did in 2002 was I set out a strategy, and I spent my first 6 months, if you like, trying to sort of explain to people, what it was we were trying to do. Not that this is your job, you have to put up that pole or you have to string these lines. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to make the network one of the best in Europe. We are going to tackle the competition. It's going to come. We're going to facilitate it. We're going to do all the things that we would be required to do over time because of EU legislation, competition legislation, and we will get there first. And we will show people that we can actually rebuild the network in a very short order, which we did. And we were spending about $1 billion a year on rebuilding the network right across the country. And we sold a number of power stations, not our best ones now, mind you, but we sold a number of power stations to allow that competition to develop. Because what the staff couldn't get through that whole transition period was, through that period, stop now, but during that time that I was there, we had to declare the price we charged for electricity. And we had to charge that price for electricity, and then everybody else could undercut it. Now, it seems like a crazy system, but the only way really you can try and get people a certain market share, unless you give them that market share, which is also difficult. So that was really, really difficult for the staff. But my attitude was, we'll get there much quicker than we are required to get it, and then it's an open field, and we'll see whether we can compete or not.
Didn't you have to lose a lot of the workforce though?
Well, a lot of that happened through the 90s. We had to reduce the workforce fairly substantially. But like in an organisation like ESB, at that time we had two advantages. One, it was the age profile was high, and there was a lot of people who were worried, let's say, that the future might be different, and they had a lot of service, and if they got a few more years they were prepared to go. So all of the big cuts in ESB staff levels happened on a voluntary basis.
But the criticism is that you threw money at the rest of them, that they were the best paid workers in Ireland at one stage?
Well, I don't think they were the best paid workers in Ireland, but they were well paid, and I wanted them to be well paid, and I wanted the level of performance that would match that. I never wanted them to be not to be well paid, but like the papers will always pick some extreme example, when they'll say that some guy got so much overtime. I'm not saying that the examples they picked were wrong, but it wasn't the norm. Now ESB staff were well paid, they had good pensions, but the level of performance they produced when we have the staff numbers, showed that they were capable of doing that. So I never wanted them to be badly paid. I didn't want them to be overpaid. And I think that was the balance we tried to achieve.
What approach did you take with the unions? How difficult was it to work with them? And
Well, I think that the first thing we did was we explained exactly what the future of the company was going to be in terms of where we were. We also knew that everybody knew that there had been no capital expenditure, and that we had to right the company first before we could ever get there. So like what we did with the unions, we had a very open approach with them. We had difficulties in a place like ESB because there were about 11 unions, and we, managed through the whole process to have negotiating rights with about 5 and deal with those 5. So we were upfront. We said, told them exactly where we were, told them what the options were, and I suppose the big thing that the unions wanted, it's very, very difficult for them, because as they always said, it's easy for us to come in here and talk to you. We have to go out and talk to the people outside who are much tougher than talking to you, and but I suppose they knew as well that there were a lot of people in the, that were in the long service categories who were keen to go. Yeah. So it was a bit of a match there, in the sense that they didn't, as long as they were getting a commitment from us that we wouldn't impose compulsory redundancy in any particular area, and that required a lot of moving, and retraining of people, because, as always, the people don't go in exactly the spots where you want them to go. So a lot of retraining in that area. And when you start big redundancy programs, like, you have to accept that you're going to lose good people, Now it was voluntary on both sides. They could say no, we could say no. But you will lose good people. But again, in my career, I never minded that. I never minded losing good people, because it showed that, we weren't locking down the place, and it provided great opportunities for other people to come
But
through.
you were a man that came through the system. As CEO, how did you feel? Any empathy? Or is there no such a word in the CEO's vocabulary?
No, there is, to a certain degree, I suppose. All right. You mean with people who were leaving?
You were having to leave.
Well, there was one thing about it was they were getting well rewarded for it, for their service, and the packages were good, and they were voluntary, so okay, there was a bit of pushing and shoving in places, but they were voluntary. If someone did not want to go, we would, accommodate them in some other way over time.
Were you very hands-on over all that?
I don't think if you're a chief executive of a company that has that number of staff, you can be hands-on all the time. You can drive certain areas of it, but you've got to sort of, you've got to let the organisation deliver, and you've got to have a team that you trust. And that means most times for chief executives is changing teams and getting people in and creating that kind of momentum. But also that, if you're a chief executive and you create a team, as opposed to taking the team that was there before, you have their absolute loyalty.
Yes.
Because you put them in that position,
yes,
and you put them in it to deliver something for you. So I think it's really important for chief executives to not to run in with an axe, but to sort of, over a period of time, try to get the team that you really feel that will deliver for you. And that may mean some people are already there, but it will definitely mean change.
And are you good at delegation of authority and so on?
Well, I am, but I believe I am, but I was at a conference one time. There was an American guy speaking, and he said, empowerment is a bunch of nonsense. He said, and everybody kind of sat back, and he said, because there are stupid people in the world. And it's not that I accepted it or believed it, but there is a grain in it. You have to empower people that you trust. And once I had people in positions that I was comfortable with, that I worked well with, then yes, let them at it.
Are you ruthless?
I think, every chief executive, to survive, for a period of time, you have to be ruthless to a certain extent. I mean, I personally believe that you must, get people to buy into what it is you're trying to do, and you must deal with problems. And to deal with problems, you have got to be ruthless to a certain degree. So if you're a leader in an organisation and you have a problem with staff, problem with whatever it is, and you leave it there, the problem will go away. In 90% of cases, you can leave it there, the problem will go away, but it will not be solved. And it will come back again. So where you have to be ruthless is where you run into difficulties either with people or with projects or whatever. In those cases, you have to be ruthless. And I never considered myself ruthless, but friends used to tell me afterwards that they, that things weren't nice or whatever, and I said, well, so be it. Life has to go on. You have to You have to achieve things, and you have to sort that. The other really, really good thing, and you have to be ruthless about that as well, is, and people are not naturally ruthless, is in feedback. So you come in, it's generally either before or after Christmas, you're doing these kind of things, and you say to someone, oh, you're doing great, you're doing great, and all this kind of thing. And if they're not doing great, and you don't tell them they're not doing great, well, then they won't be great next year. Yeah. But it's comfortable for people. People don't want to say, I'll tackle it again. Your bonus is up, here's, I'll give you 5% instead of 6 or something like that. But feedback is really important. It has to be delivered properly, and it has to be valid. And it has to be delivered with a certain amount of ruthlessness, or you won't get improvement. Not everybody in an organization is eventually going to become the chief executive. The reality, the numbers state it's going to be very few. But what you want to try and do as a chief executive is to get that extra piece out of everybody. And I think that people actually like feedback. They mightn't like it on the day, they might fight back, they might argue the toss, but when they go back and think about it, they're happier about it.
The other big challenge, and I suppose one of the big success stories of in your role as CEO, was the acquisition of NIE. So this was a southern company buying a northern company.
Yeah.
More than just a financial headache, that I would have thought.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I suppose the first thing for us, like in ESB, well, like it's a small island, and even though it was developed as two kind of separate networks, there was a network developed in the south, network developed in the north. We had links to it, not just the famous one that was blown up many times, but we had several links. So in a sense, it was all one network, and so I always would have had an ambition to try and sort of integrate that and build a proper network, and then it was for sale. And
who owned NIE at the time?
It was owned by the Bahrain company whose name escapes me now.
Arcapita.
Arcapita. Thanks, Jerry. Yeah, Arcapita owned it. And the difficulty, we could run into this bit in air when I sort of moved to air later, is that finance people, are not great with utilities, because what finance people want to do is they want to turn everything into cash, get a lot of free cash, get the good number up, get a good multiple, and dispose. Whereas utilities need investment, and there's no such thing as no capital investment in utilities. And you saw what happened to the network in the south in the 90s when there was no capital investment. Very, very quickly the whole thing starts to disintegrate. So what finance companies want to do is they gather up a lot of money from a lot of different people, they invest it, and they need a big return, and that does not sit well with CapEx. So our capital were having their own difficulties anyway, but we knew from the grapevine that they would be prepared to sell the network if the right deal came along. So we started at that time to push.
Right, so money was one thing.
Yeah.
You had political hurdles and various other hurdles to overcome.
The political hurdles were, believe it or not, more concern in the south than in the north.
Really?
Yeah. Would people, resent it? Would it create political difficulties? Would people be opposed to it? And I got a good message from from Gregory Campbell when we built the power station in Coolkira. And I was sitting beside him at a lunch that we were having around the launch of it, and I said, you gave us great help in getting this project built. And, when I tell people that down south, they find it hard to believe, knowing you from your TV persona. And he said, well, I'm firm in my views. I'm not going to change those in any way. But if someone wants to invest 200 million in my constituency, I'll help them in any way I can.
There you go.
Which he did, So when I had many meetings with all the politicians in the north, and Arlene Foster was the Minister for Detty at that time. And after dealing with her, I told a lot of my friends, put money on her to be the next First Minister.
Did you
because as a government minister, I thought she was really, really sound.
What were their concerns, though?
In the end of the day, she asked me 3 questions. She said, are you going to change the name from NIE? I said, no, we want the name of NIE. It's well known, everybody knows it. We'll be looking to do things and everyone knows NIE. Are you going to start a big redundancy program? I said, no. I'm not saying that there won't be redundancies in certain places, but no big, massive program. And are you going to make the capital investments that are needed in the north? And I said, yes, as long as we get a good regulatory regime. We have to make money, but our interest is in growing the business, making a bigger business, and investing in the network here. So she said, can I write those answers into the record of the house? I says, absolutely certain. She said, okay, off you go.
So that placated them totally.
So, I had many, many meetings. I'm not saying that it was as simple as that. It took about a year, and I was up, and I became very well known in the Hilton Hotel, staying there, But in the end, that's what it sort of came down to. And I must say, apart from the politics of it all, the staff were delighted, because they, as utility people know, they were owned by a finance house, who ultimately, like, they have fancy names for all these, like private equity, hedge funds, all of these things. They're traders, they buy, they sell, they make a return. And the fact that a utility was buying NIE was what really excited the staff about it. The first major meetings they had with the staff, they were delighted that somebody was going to take a long-term view of the business, as opposed to somebody saying, can I increase the cash flow?
And has it been a success?
Yes, I mean, it has. They've had difficulties with regulation, but you always do. You're trying to negotiate, a reasonable return that sort of balances the price of electricity and getting a return on the investment, because investment in network is not cheap. You're talking about large sums of money, and you're investing them for a sort of 25 to 35 year period. So you need to get a solid return. So they have had their battles with the regulators, but that's the way the business works.
And how much did it cost the ESB? Much of the whole deal worth?
The papers had numbers on it, but I've never commented on it.
1.2 billion.
I saw that in the paper, all right.
Near it.
We paid for it, though. We did pay for it.
How do you feel? You were saying you're an engineer. How do you feel going into these committees and talking high finance? Are you comfortable with that?
I think people should do more of it. I think people should, no matter what business they're in, if they're going to be, whether technical or IT or whatever, they probably should do more of finance. I learned it on the hoof, I learned it because I went through it. But probably people could be, have more rounded educations. I mean, it was one of the education system in the South that I, really disliked. The whole point system is that, kids give up history and geography, which I think is a terrible thing, even though, I was moving into a technical space myself. But they give up really important subjects that make them grow and be people at way too young an age. But I think universities are probably better now. I think they need a broader, no matter what degree you're doing, you need a broader business base. I think it's probably happening. But the best way to learn is when you have to.
Get out there and do it. You eventually you left in 2011.
Yes.
Why did you leave?
Well, first of all, if you become chief executive of the ESB, it's a 7-year contract, non-extendable. 7-year contract. So it was extended for 3 years,
Right.
But there was no staying beyond that. And in any case, 7 years is probably long enough for anyone to be chief executive of a normal company. For a utility, probably 10, because you plan things and it takes so long to get them built. That I say for a utility 10 years is okay. That's because I did 10 myself.
Yes.
But so I was 60 at that time, and there wasn't an option then to extend beyond that.
And how do you view your 10 years there?
Well, I think a lot of great things happened, during that time. We rebuilt the network. We acquired NIE. We opened the electricity market. We did that proactively. We did it well ahead of time. We got really good progress in terms of work practices and in sort of getting to staffing levels that are comparable with the commercial world. We made great strides in trying to sort of regularize the pension fund. And all in all, when I look back, I think there was
you're
plenty
proud of
done.
what you achieved.
Yeah. Well, I'm proud of the company as well. I had a great time in it. I left it a few times, but always went back. And it is a great company, great technical company, great technical engineers in it, and great training. Like we train apprentices as well, And like the apprentices, we would generally train about 50 apprentices a year and would get about 4,000 or 5,000 applicants for that, which is a political headache when everyone wants their son to be or daughter to be in to get a trade in ESB. But we wouldn't always take them all on, and in the marketplace they are the first that are sought after if they're not taken on by ESB,
There you go.
So the training is good,
Well, if you're paying them that well, I'd be looking for a job myself.
Good man, Jerry. Well, I'll tell you a good story that there was a lady who worked in the ESB, great employee, worked in the ESB all her life, and she had one son and she wanted him to be an electrician. And the way in which we sort of stopped all of the people asking was, there's an aptitude test. So you have to pass the aptitude test. If you don't pass the aptitude test, nobody can do anything for you. So this young fella, who was quite clever young fella, didn't get the aptitude test. My firm belief is that he deliberately didn't get the aptitude test. But he opened a few bookie shops and sold them to Boyle Sports.
Oh, lovely.
But he could have been an electrician in the ESB.
Just before we leave your role as CEO, what would you say are the characteristics? What are the skill sets that you need to be a good CEO?
Well, the first thing you have to know is you're going to be on your own a lot. That's the absolute reality. It is a kind of a lonely place, and you have to accept that that's the way it is. You have a good team around you, but ultimately the buck stops with you. So it can be a lonely place at times, and you have to be able to deal with that. I think that, as I said before, you've got to make it very, very clear to everybody what your strategy is. People want to know nowadays. I mean, in the old days, there was you could rule by fear, and fear has its place, Jerry, with some people. But in the old style, places were run by fear. You did this, or I will have your neck. But the world has changed. People are not interested in that anymore. People want to know, why am I doing that? And I think you've got to be able to explain in a big organisation, right down to the sort of grassroots level, what the strategy means, what it is we're trying to achieve as a company, not some document that you print up and put a glossy cover on and leave it to one side. You've got to explain that strategy right down through the organisation. You've got to get people to buy in at all levels as what it is you're trying to do. And then you've got to stretch people. And to do that, you've got to be prepared to, I've always said to managers, don't be afraid to let your best person go to somewhere else, because it's a mark of you. You'll improve the organisation and you have the opportunity to bring sort of new people in. So you've got to stretch people. You've got to try and get that extra piece, that if someone is left on their own with a clear message as to what they've got to do, even if they are out in some far-flung place, they can deliver that same strategy. Like the other thing we always used to try and bottle, like in ESB, was if we had a storm, people worked day and night and loved it, and there was never an accident, even though it was in really difficult places. People were so concentrated, they absolutely had to get it back. So you've got to try and achieve that. You've got to try and get people to buy in to what it is you're trying to do at all levels in the organisation, and then you've got to challenge people. You've got to give proper feedback to people, and look for opportunities to improve them. And always be out there trying to sort of make changes. You see, in big organisations as well, I'm not talking about the ESB alone, but in lots of organisations, there are lots of people in it who are in that particular job by dint of circumstance, who never had an opportunity maybe to go further, never had an opportunity to sort of move beyond exactly what they're doing.
Yes.
Now, what happens to those people is they get frustrated. And if they get frustrated, they'll turn it out on you normally. So you've got to try and identify those people and identify opportunities, and always be looking for new opportunities. There was a guy, Liam O'Mahony, who used to be the chief executive of CRH, and we were having a chat about this one night. And he said because they had been doing so much, they had taken on this attitude of, every time he went to sort of talk to his senior team, which I found as well, to talk about someone and said, we'll put somebody so-and-so out into some new territory. Oh, they're too young, haven't enough experience, another 2 years, he said. Anyone who said that to me, I had warned them, nobody dare say that to me ever again. So it was a good tip, if you challenge people, the vast majority of them will succeed.
You were looking for new challenges after 2011, and Air came along.
Yeah.
Completely different company altogether, telecommunications company. You were in as chairman as that.
Yeah.
But what attracted you to that?
Well, I suppose I had one thing that Air really needed. was like back to 2002 when the ESB network was in very poor state. The air network when I was in was in a very poor state. So, you know, poles, cables, just different types of cables, and so, you know, it was air had come out of examinership, the biggest, or administration, whatever administration I think it was called, much the same thing, and I'm sure Fergal wouldn't agree. I'm sure he'd give me a serious technical explanation, but anyway, it was worthless. The equity was worthless, and the debt was trading at 68 cents in the euro, and Blackstone bought it. Now, they didn't buy it. They became the major shareholder. They didn't do it, as I would have said to them afterwards, they didn't do it, you know, just walked in and said it's 68 cents in the euro, good company, get good people in, try and turn it around. They bought a company that had a 200 million debt in air. So they bought a load more shares at 68 cents in the euro to balance out their holding. And they held it for about 3 years. And everyone said to me at the time, do not work with Blackstone. They're rough and all of this kind of stuff, you know. And I found them super. You know, their attitude was, these are your targets. Don't cause trouble for me. Don't let me hear anything that I shouldn't hear. Meet me once a month and get on with it.
So in many ways, it doesn't matter. This was a telecommunications company. Could have been.
It had lots of problems, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, but one of the big ones was the network, and not alone that. The public view was that there wasn't proper broadband or telecommunications or mobile, and it was Air's fault. And even if it was in the Aran Islands, it didn't matter. A politician was asked, "Why isn't there good service?" "Oh, it's Air's fault." And it's hard to dispute that. Like from the time the O'Reillys, Tony O'Reilly bought it around the early 2000s, through all the ownerships it had up to very recently, there were finance houses that owned it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't fit with CapEx, you know. And that's why I think that the sale now that we've, you know, that's just been concluded to the French company is going to buy Air. They are a utility. They're planning for 20 years. They're not planning for next year and, you know, getting cash into the system. So it was a challenge. But I mean, people are the same. You know, the network needed to be rebuilt. Customer service needed to be sort of re-established, and we had to get the staff to sort of get up off the ground, if you like, because they were walked into the ground from, you know, bad publicity and debt, an overhang of debt.
And what position are they in now? What position are they in?
Well, from a time when the equity was worthless and the debt was trading at 68 cents in the euro, their debt trades at par and the company's worth about 1.5 to 2 billion. So it was a good turnaround.
And yet you walked away from that again last year.
Well, you know, I had done 5 years in it, and I think as a chairman that was a good stint. There was a sale coming, and you know, when a new sort of utility comes over, they want their own people in, and that's perfectly understandable, you know. Okay. So, but I had a good stint. I really enjoyed it, and we made great progress.
It does seem that 2017 is the year where you've had a little bit of self-analysis, a little bit of thinking down on what am I going to do with the rest of my life, because you're out of ESB, you're out of Air. I know you have other things that we'll talk about, but have you come to a stage at 65, 66 years of age where you're thinking, maybe I've done it all now?
No, I don't think so. I have a good friend in the Philippines who's 90, and he says the secret to life is work. And I agree with that. I mean, it's not for everybody. Some people can actually retire and play golf or you know, go wherever they want to go, and I like to do those things as well. But I also believe that as long as I'm healthy and fit, that I'd like to work. And it's not that I'm going to work, you know, in an executive role 6 days a week, no, you know, or whatever. But I think that, you know, for me anyway, you know, I believe that, you know, the secret to being sort of healthy and happy and enthused is to work.
So what have you kept on?
So I chair the ESRI, the Economic and Social Research Institute. Yeah.
How often would you sit on that, for example?
Well, we have four meetings, 4 formal meetings a year, but then I would deal independently with the director, and then we have a strategy session, and it's really good, really interesting. You know, it's obviously a research institute, so we have to manage the organisation. The board does not take responsibility for the output. Mm-hmm. The writers, we set the rules, and they follow the rules, and really interesting. But to get to see everything that's sort of happening and get a close-up view of it, I took on the chairmanship of the Curra Racecourse Company. The Curra Racecourse is a beautiful track, but the facilities were Dickensian, and have knocked that completely rebuilding the facilities. Will be finished by the end of this year. I chair a number of local operations, like the County Council set up their swimming pools and gyms in Kildare as a wholly owned subsidiary, and I chair that. And I'm trying to rebuild the Kildare football grounds as well. And I chair the Foundation for Holles Street. Nothing to do with the management of Holles Street, the National Maternity Hospital, but trying to raise money to give them that bit of extra stuff that they don't have, you know.
Wasn't it great that you did an engineer's degree at UCD? Because now they want you for your financial acumen. All these places.
I'm not sure about that. So the project, like to rebuild the Curra Racecourse and the local football grounds, they're kind of labours of love. That's my home place, you know, and they were always iconic places for us growing up, you know. And to see them in sort of disrepair, like when the people came to ask me to chair the Curra Racecourse, I said, look, I grew up in Naas, so you can't avoid horse racing. It's everywhere, you know. It's just there as part of your life. But I don't, like some of my friends, take out the newspaper in the morning and do all the stuff, you know. And I've owned legs of horses, but never I was never the driver, you know. It was friends who said, come on, we're going to buy this horse, you know. And in all my time of owning horses, I've had one winner in Killarney, and the trainer never told us who was going to win, you know. we didn't give her any more horses, even though Jessica is a very famous trainer, you know, remain nameless.
You have a great love, or great passion for GAA, and especially Kildare, have you not?
Yeah, I follow all sports, you know. The only sport that my wife kicks up at is darts. You know, and I said, it's a social experiment, look at it, you know, look at the reaction of the people, you know. But she'll put up with anything, you know. And it's not that she's even watching it, but she's around the house. But darts she won't put up with, you know. And so, you know, I've been to an awful lot of, had the good fortune to be at an awful lot of sports events worldwide. But I suppose the GAA would be my spiritual homeland, if you want to put it that way, you know.
Well, I wish you well this year.
Thank you very much. I know you're laughing at me when you're saying that, you know. You're going to say something else about Kildare, but anyway.
Will we ask the question?
Long suffering.
We'll ask the question, see if anybody knows. When was the last time Kildare won the All-Ireland?
2 in a row.
Two in a row.
Yeah.
What? Well done, 1928.
27 and
27 and 28, yes, 27, 28.
I'll tell you a funny story about that. We got to the All-Ireland final in 98 and beat Kerry in the semi-final, and of course that was it was over, you know. We had beaten Kerry and we forgot about the fact that we had to play Galway in the final. But early that year we had a contract with the ESB International in Russia, teaching them how to do live line work, like working while the network is live. We had done a lot of that and had been very early into that game, and you know, some of the Russian utilities felt a bit of resentment that this tiny place was coming to teach them how to do it, but they were only starting it. So the whole program was laid out, and in early that year, and the presentation of the awards was to happen in September. So the Russian guy was over in Dublin. He said to me, will you come out for the presentation of the awards? I said, I will, unless my team are in the All-Ireland final. He says, when did your team last win? I said, 1928. I said, I'll go ahead and make the arrangement.
Two other things I want to talk about that you're interested in. You're involved in a charity in Ghana.
Yeah.
Was that from your early days?
Yeah, well, I worked in Ghana for, I think I've lost my...
Oh, you've got it. Found it. You work away, I'll find it.
Yeah, I had worked in Ghana for about 3 or 4 years with ESB International, and I suppose I got to know and love the country, you know, and lovely people, and not, you know, a certain amount of corruption, but not bad, you know, not really bad, and like some other places, you know, that would be nearby to it, and I still have, you know, I'm still in touch with a lot of friends and that. So when I became chief executive, you have the power to do things when you're chief executive. So we started this charity that we would, people in the ESB would pay for their own flights and accommodation and would go out, and we would get a local contractor to do all the sort of early work in schools, and then our teams would go out and finish them. And so my friends out there told me absolutely not to try and build new schools, too much bureaucracy, take an old school, take an existing school and rebuild it. So the first one we rebuilt had about 3,000 kids in it. Completely rebuilt it, fabulous job, looked spectacular. The toilet block didn't work, so I'm going to go back to fix that, you know. And but because there was 3,000 in the morning and 3,000 in the afternoon, they had shift system because of the lack of facilities, you know. So we did that for a number of years, and there was a number of things about it. First of all, it was great. I had the ability to pay for it, pay for the work, and the board were very supportive. And but the people who never would have got an opportunity to understand what Africa was, you know, and got out there, they loved it as well. And it created a great you know, enthusiasm around, even no matter where people went from, they went back and told everybody, and more people wanted to go. And then since I've retired, you know, myself and a few friends have continued to do clinics, you know, to build clinics and that. So we're going again this year.
And are you a James Joyce scholar as well?
I don't know how you knew that. I have an interest.
You have a book club.
Yeah.
James Joyce book club.
Well, what happened was, I have actually read it a few times. I'm not an expert in it in any way, but the more you read it, the more you enjoy it, and the more you see the fun in it, and you know, you can actually laugh at it. And we were talking about this at a going away function in Ayr, and people were asking about it, and I said, why don't we sort of form a group and I'll lead you through it, you know, and we'll set targets, and we'll have a party on Bloomsday 19. And so I gave them a few bit of reading material to do before Christmas. I said we start on the 1st of January. So 1st of January started. I gave them the books. There's, you know, if you've never read Ulysses, you really need notes that can explain some of the things that are in it, or else you need to have a really good understanding of the Greek classics and Shakespeare and lots of other things, and you know, lots of other writings about religions of all kinds. And so I said, okay, the 31st of January is the deadline to have episode 1 finished, and you're all to send me a WhatsApp message to say done, conquered. And there's about, I think there's 18 episodes, and I think we have 10 people. So, you know, I'm trying to give each person 2 episodes to specialize in, you know. I said we'll start off, everybody read episode 1, and it's not difficult, and episode 1 isn't difficult, you know. So out of the 10 people, how many had read episode 1 on the 31st of January?
2.
You're almost right, 1. But a second one came in on the 1st of February, you know, so you were nearly there. So I've been scolding them since, you know, to get on with it, you know.
I do want to open it up for them, but just 2 points that I would like you to talk about just for a little moment. Brexit and renewable energies.
Well, Brexit is, you know, Brexit is difficult. It's difficult for us as an island, you know, in every sense. And we are not the biggest player in the world, even, you know, even in relation to the United Kingdom or in relation to Europe. But like, if you look at just, you know, I'm not going to start talking about a whole load of numbers in relation to Brexit, but like the South does $1 billion a month in trade with the UK. And of the Northern Ireland's trade, external trade, 70% is with the EU, and something like 25% is with the South. There's about 100,000 lorry and van trips for business north-south every week, or every day, I'd say. Is every day, something like that. Some outrageous number, I don't even know what it is. It's a bit like Nigel Farage said, I know it wasn't 385, but even if it was 200, it was a lot of money. But so I think it's really difficult. I think, you know, it's a bit like, was it Ho Chi Minh said about the French Revolution? He says too early to say. Yes, and I think it's a bit like that. You know, the problem is for us in relation to Brexit. You know, if it goes through in a hard way, with a border on that, it is not going to be good for the island, north or south. And I think nobody knows at this stage the answer to how it is actually going to work out.
But the single market would be the preferable choice with it.
Yeah, well, obviously the single market would be the preferable choice if if you have a particular interest. The problem, I suppose, for us on the island is the rest of Europe know that this little border exists, and they know that it's troublesome, and it was almost like when they were getting over it to get into the negotiation of, God, we better agree to something, like that, which, except for us living on the island, it's much more significant. And it's hard to see. Now Theresa May was out yesterday saying, that there isn't going to be, they're not going to partake in the customs union. And so how do you do that without actually causing some kind of difficulty despite all the commitments that have been made? Now, it may be that given where it is, that it's a negotiating position. I hope it is. But I think it's really important for the island, north and south, to get a really good outcome. And a really good outcome for us is no border.
And maybe a few words on renewable energy sources.
Well, renewable energy is the one of the things about renewable energy, I suppose, is that when oil was at $100 a barrel, $120 a barrel, went up to $130 a barrel, and even in ESB we had a lot of contracts with wind farmers, and when oil was up at 100, so we paid them a contract rate. When oil went up to $130 a barrel, then they could make money on their own, and they came in and said, we want to surrender our contracts, we want to trade in the market. I said, fine, go to your banks and ask them to release you from your commitments, and no problem with me. So they went to the banks, and the bank said, 15-year contract with ESB, or the volatility of the oil market, stay with ESB. You see, so the problem now is that to get renewables to a break-even level, you need oil to be up at that level, kind of $120 a barrel, and it's never going to get there again, unless through short term for political turmoil it might get there. But the Americans have so much shale gas. That's what made the price go down to $30 a barrel. The Americans were using shale gas, and even if you read the Financial Times this morning, see Saudi Arabia and Russia, who would not be natural bedfellows, are getting together to form sort of an oil bloc. So when the oil price was heading south from real high levels at $100 a barrel, then the Saudi Arabia foreign oil minister, or whatever they call him, he was saying it's a competitive world. It's not making it or keeping it or anything like that. The US is the biggest market for energy in the world, and if they are self-sufficient, we're all in trouble from an oil perspective. Now what that means is that probably the settling ground for oil is something like $60 to $70, apart from small fluctuations for political disturbance, and that makes it harder for renewable energies to cash. So that again means, I don't want to get into this study that my good friend Arlene got into, is that means schemes to support renewable energy.
Could you think of any?
The reality is of these schemes is they are difficult to put in place, and of course, believe it or not, what governments try and do is try and make sure that companies do not make a load of money on them. And there was a much worse case than than here, like in Spain, where they had a huge tariff for solar because they had sun and all of that, and they just walked away from it. So the balance, we're going to need renewable energies, and renewable energies have got to be supported. We're going to have to pay for them because the technology will get better, but they still won't cash on their own. And so there is going to have to be support schemes, and even if you got the first one wrong, there is going to be more. It's the only way that they will survive. Like people when I was in ESB, the offshore wind lobby did not like me because I said offshore wind is R&D, it's research and development. There's huge wind sources out there, but to actually make it work and service it, is really, really expensive. So you have to build it so big that you can make it pay, and in Scandinavia they've been doing that. So a lot of the technologies are still at research and development level. They do need to be supported. We do need more renewable energy, but I suspect we're going to have more nuclear energy as well.
Padraig, thank you so much. Give Padraig a round of applause. Has anybody any questions would like to ask Padraig? I'm sure there's a whole lot of areas that we didn't cover that you would like to cover. Were we that good? We covered all the areas. Wow, yes.
Padraig, just extending your knowledge of...
Oh, sorry, we've got this ball. We had it last year. This is a wonderful yoke. This still doesn't work. Didn't work last year either. There we go.
Always works.
Sorry.
Padraig, just talking about infrastructure on the island, and you've had direct experience of two significant blocks of infrastructure, and setting aside any issues about Brexit at this point in time, I mean, what's your perspective on developing infrastructure on the island in other areas? I'm thinking of water and activities like that.
Water is a very, I suppose, contentious one, and I'm in that block who believe that people should pay for water. I think that in the south that those days are gone for now, so it's going to have to be paid for general taxation. It is definitely easier to build infrastructure within the state sector. The people would talk to me about, let's say, broadband and why broadband hasn't been extended universally, and it's as important as electricity. Well, nothing is as important as electricity, but the electricity networks that were extended to every single sort of home in most countries were done at a time when those utilities were owned by the state. And when the rural electrification happened in Ireland in the late 40s and 50s, the government said to ESB, get on and do it, and we'll subsidise it, and we'll do it afterwards, and we'll look at your accounts and all that kind of thing, and we'll sort the subsidy afterwards. But of course they never paid the subsidy. Now you can't get away with that with private companies that own infrastructure. And the reality of private companies owning infrastructure is that they want a return, and they are having to invest for a very long period of time, and they need a return. So how do we square all of that? If you look a bit further and say, I think myself it's absolutely inevitable that the UK will build nuclear stations again. And when they went to do that, the private sector wouldn't do it, so it had to come back on the state to provide state guarantees. And I think there's a model there in relation to how that could happen, that could allow infrastructure to be built. That it's so important for everybody that all the sort of infrastructure, it happens, and you can see as each piece happens and gets better, everything sort of improves. But I think the model that we're relying on, whereby private companies will do the kind of investment we need in infrastructure, is not going to happen on its own. I think there's going to have to be some kind of a mix between state, and I think the way in which the nuclear programme in the UK is funded could be the model.
Yes. Throw the ball, please. Us.
We got time for a clue there, Padraig, thank you. Jerry talked earlier on about you being an engineer, and then over the course of your career you moved into this broad business, and we talked about business acumen. How did you develop the management, the leadership, the entrepreneurial, the business skills along the way? Is it something that was latent and just came out through experience, or did you take direct action at any time to go and develop your skills and capabilities?
Well, I think I didn't stay put. I went to different places and I saw how different places operated, and I think that's how I learned it. I think there's probably better ways for people to learn it, but maybe when you learn it on the hoof, you learn it better because you have to. I think it's a kind of natural progression for a lot of people that they, would do some primary degree and work in that area, but then move either into business or into technologies or whatever. And I think that, as I was saying before, can everybody sort of get there in terms of that? But my own personal no is the answer to that, because there's just so few positions. My own personal belief is that people can always be better. And if you look either through the job you have or the work you do, or even what you do outside, I think people can can build expertise. I would regularly ask people at interviews, what do you do apart from work, you know? And it was always a kind of a quiet moment of people said, well, I do nothing. And I said, nothing. Do you walk? You know, do you bring your kids to football or soccer or rugby or basketball, or are you involved? And yeah, sometimes, you know. And I'd say, okay, move on. Next candidate, please. You know. So I think it's really important for people to look for opportunities both inside and outside, and I also think it's important for every individual to give something back. And I'm not talking about old guys like myself and Jerry, you know, who have kind of worked hard and have more time. I'm talking about everybody at every stage of their life should be involved in their community in some way or other. That's what I always try to extract from people. And then, of course, the word got round, you better get involved in some club. He's going to ask you about it. So I think the universities can do more in terms of rounding people better, providing them with the tools, you know, to improve. But there's nothing like learning on the ground.
Back right hand corner there. Oh, for dear sake, it's like a... Oh. Well done, hey.
That was very interesting. I suppose I was at a talk earlier in the year or last year, and the question was asked of the speaker, what would they advise, I suppose, a young person starting out in their career to study, particularly in light of, I suppose, automation and robotics. What would your advice be?
Well, first of all, lots of people ask me that question, you know, but it's generally parents that ask me. And what do I say to them? Well, you're not doing it. Send me whoever it is that has an interest in doing something or other, you know. Send me your son or daughter and let me talk to them. Because everybody has kind of different interests, you know, and they don't always align with what their mother or father has in mind, as I was telling you earlier. So I think the absolute, you know, issue for people is to sort of study more education. I think a university degree, no matter what you do, some are harder than others, obviously. You know, we would always have moaned doing engineering that we had to be in 8 hours every day, you know, and while the guys doing commerce were in three half days a week or something like that, you know. But I think it's actually only, you know, a starting point. So to an extent, unless you absolutely want to be, you know, you've decided you want to be a doctor, you've decided you want to be an engineer, you've decided you want to be a lawyer, that's one thing. But the vast majority of people who come to me to ask me, they don't know what they want to do, you know. And I say, you know, try and find out what their particular interests, what they're strong at, and do some kind of a degree, improve your education, then travel. You know, I had a depressing session with a group of second-year engineers during the bust, and they were so, you know, dreary about the whole thing, but there was going to be no jobs for them when they got out and all of this. And I said, you're in second year, you know, enjoy yourselves for God's sake. You know, by the time you get out of college, go and travel, do something, travel to work or travel to help, but get out there. And the other thing I advise people as well is try and learn a language. Doesn't matter what it is. It gives you, it's amazing, like you say, oh sure, French will be no good to me, German will be no good to me, whatever. It's amazing the opportunities that come your way where a language is really useful to you. And don't fret, you know, look for opportunities. Like I always ask people as well at interviews, have you traveled? You know, have you got out of your comfort zone? You know, have you gone somewhere? And because I think that's really important as well. So the first thing I tell them is don't fret, it will work. Let's find the right course. Try and get involved when you go to college in some activity in the college. Get to know lots of people and try your best to learn a language, and then come back and talk to me again. I don't think there's a magic answer to that, you see. And there's so many opportunities and people think, oh, if I do that, you know, it's not like that. It's a grounding, you know.
What was your second language?
German.
Ah. Anyone else? It's getting 12 o'clock. We're very conscious of time. Well, maybe time for one last one. Thank you.
Who's going to win Sunday's Run or Kildare?
Well, I'll be there, and I think Kildare will win. But I thought they'd beat Monaghan last week as well, so.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll leave it at that stage. Fergal's going to come back up and say our farewells, but would you please thank for a fabulous hour's chat Padraig
McManus. Professor Durkin and ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, on your behalf and on behalf of PKF-FPM and indeed Ulster University, I'd like to express our heartfelt appreciation to Padraig McManus for sharing his inspirational approach to leadership, certainly applied engineering and definitely people management with us this morning on our 7th annual leadership talk. I thought that it was enthralling. Thank you very much indeed, Padraig. Padraig's passion for business, aligned to a clear set of values to make a positive difference to this island and beyond, was clearly evident, I think, as we heard his life and career experiences. It was perhaps refreshing to reflect on Padraig's comment, if you can get those around you to buy into it, what it is you're trying to achieve and your strategy, then you're on the road to becoming a leader. I think he then said, if I'm right, business doesn't always have to be done the way it was done. There can be better ways. So true. It is obvious from this morning's discussion why this proud Kildare man, who followed in the footsteps of his father, also an ESB engineer, and joined the ESB in 1973, as Jerry has so often referred to in the 10 great years as CEO, was recognised as one of the architects of the Celtic Tiger Irish economy and a leading business person of his generation. His pioneering role in the ESB, both on the island of Ireland and, as we've heard so often this morning, across the world, and indeed playing the game of people management and politics here in Northern Ireland when he acquired NIE Networks, has really seen him show how he has developed global expertise and led others to copy him and to grow international corporations from the island of Ireland. I have to say, I should acknowledge, I don't know whether, I'm sure Padraig knew, the gentleman who asked that first question, I suspect he was quite actively involved at one stage, the former head of the civil service for Bruce Robinson. So Bruce, you're very welcome and thank you for being here this morning. Post ESB, Padraig's many senior business and community leadership roles, including, as we referred to, chairman of ERCOM and chairman of the mining equipment company Mincon Group, and his current position as president of ESRI, along with board memberships of the Irish Management Institute, Chartered Accountants Ireland and Business in the Community. They all demonstrate recognition by others of his astute leadership skills, wisdom and judgment. And also, I suppose, the old philosophy of St. Francis, it is in giving that we receive. If ever we've got an advertisement this morning for anybody starting off in life, it is in giving that we receive. It's very important. You always have to demonstrate what you're doing outside of work as well as inside work. Yes, Padraig McManus, a man who I'm certainly very honoured to sit on a board with, is a true international leadership success who carries his success very lightly, and in any review of Ireland's distinguished visionary and business engineers and entrepreneurs, the name of Padraig McManus will be recognised as a pioneer and a trailblazer. Think of 30 years ago in Ghana, and many engineers had been from Ireland and Ghana putting in new systems. Yes, I think we were all privileged and honoured to be here this morning, and thank you very much indeed, Padraig. It takes two to chat, and I'm sure you'll all agree that Jerry Kelly again gave another par excellence performance. You know, central to his enormous achievements in broadcasting is the man himself. I observe quite a few of these chats, I don't know what you do, and quite often the interviewer takes over. And they tell you, before the person has a chance to tell you the story. If you notice, Jerry never does that. Even whenever Padraig had forgot the name of the Bahrain company, hope we all knew how much research Jerry had done. He came in with a name, but he wasn't going to tell you if Padraig hadn't mentioned it. That's the professionalism of Jerry Kelly. And anyone, as I have been fortunate to work with him over the years, know he has no equals. Jerry Kelly is an institution here in Northern Ireland, and long may it continue. Listening and observing Padraig McManus, thankfully I believe there are some similarities with PKF-FPM. Caring, Again, some people will know Padraig, I don't know he knows not, but our motto from day one, 26 years ago, was, we don't care how much you know until we know how much you care. And that whole concept of being people-centred and client-centred is what we try to do. And obviously in that context, we're currently greatly honoured to be uniquely the current holder of the UK Midterm Firm of the Year, Accountancy Firm of the Year, and the Irish Accountancy Practice of the Year. And I note Padraig's comments this morning that there's 10% more in every employee. But if you could even achieve a 5% increase, I'm on my way to a meeting in Balbriggan this afternoon, I have to assure you, that will be going over my mind how I get that across. But even if you achieve a 5% increase in the sum of the parts, would be very positive. And I suppose this would be consistent with our experience that business, like life, is just a game of inches. In either game, life or business, the margin for error is so small. And thus a united team with a common vision and purpose is required to deliver that superior, sustainable performance that Padraig put it very nicely, that they paid them well, but the performance had to match it. And aggressive growth, certainly for our great practice and indeed our clients. And we talk in our organisation of a thing called Team PKF-FPM. TEAM meaning working together, everybody achieves more. Thus, we seek improvement both as individuals and as a collective team in order to deliver marginal gains for our clients, recognising that 100 things done 1% better will deliver cumulative sustainable business advantage for us and all our clients. Yes, collective character is vital to success. At PKF-FPM, we believe that focusing on getting the culture right, the results will follow. We seek to encourage, and this is why we're involved in events like this, and deliver leaders at all levels throughout our practice, recognising that the being of team begins from inside. High standards must come from within, because leadership works best when our team takes the lead. We're sure we're definitely not perfect. Sure, our commitment and our perseverance will not be perfect. Yes, we're going to have setbacks and stumbles in pursuing any goal. However, the important thing is not that we have these setbacks, but rather how we react to them. Perseverance doesn't mean perfection. It's not often constant, unwavering adherence to a commitment. Instead, it is usually a series of quick course corrections when you get off track, as we regularly say, to navigate the business back on its forward journey. Thus, consistent with Padraig McManus' words of wisdom today, it is perhaps appropriate to suggest the best get better, not by thinking that they have arrived, but by continuing to adapt and grow. Yes, as Jerry and Padraig said, Brexit may be dominating the headlines, but it's not the only issue that businesses should be planning for at the moment. Attracting, developing and retaining staff, preparing a succession plan for the future, preparing for the introduction of GDPR in May 2018, and protecting your business against cyber crime should also be top priorities. We were delighted and honoured to host the Leadership Talk this morning in association with our fellow Management Leadership Network champion organisation, Ulster University Business School, as part of the Management Leadership Network Management Month. It was a great privilege to work closely with Professor Mark Durkin, Executive Dean of the Ulster University Business School, and his colleagues, Maureen Fox in particular, in the organisation of today's event, and we'd like to thank them and through them all their colleagues. I'm very conscious, God help them, that I'm a visiting professor at the university, I'm sorry for them, and a member of the University of Ulster Business School Advisory Forum, that the University of Ulster Business School is currently implementing a very exciting, some of what you heard from Mark, strategic entrepreneurial plan in the context of the university's 5 and 50 strategic priorities. Congratulations also to the Management Leadership Network and our fellow champion organisations, many of whom are represented here today under the direction of Bill Manson, who also asked the question. I should have tipped you off some of these characters before they were testing you, assisted by Podium, who have put together a tremendous programme of events, and I know many of you are involved in them all throughout the month of February. And you will appreciate that events like today just don't happen. And in respect of the food and hospitality, we'd like to thank Jennifer Campbell and her students and the student academy. In terms of ICT and audio, we'd like to thank Chris Paul and his team. We'd also like to acknowledge the PR and the media support of Jane Wells and Andrea Kennedy. And we'd also like to acknowledge our own video team, because I haven't told Padraig yet, but as you'll know from the previous years, this goes live on our own website and is available. And amazingly, the amount of interest there is actually in those leadership talks over the years. So sincere thanks to Darren Mooney, and not forgetting our photographer, Darren McCoy, and not forgetting our photographer, Darren Mooney. I hope you'd all agree that we're very fortunate to be entertained by the beautiful music at the registration reception this morning, provided by the Arco String Quartet, and we thank them for their lovely music. Indeed, I'm conscious that as I get up each morning, and unfortunately the last 2 mornings it had to be about 5:30, but there you go, how fortunate and honoured I am to lead a positive team PKF-FPM. And once again, I'd like to thank all my colleagues for their tremendous support, led by staff director colleague Teresa Campbell, and our ever efficient events manager Lauren Quinn, who must take certainly much of the praise for the organisation of today's event. In terms of thanks, finally I'd like to thank you for coming along in such great numbers and ensuring a full house within days once the invitations are issued. And therefore, just before we conclude, I have one pleasant task to make, to undertake, and that's to present Padraig in a few seconds with a caricature. Now each year we commission an artist called Brenton Pierce. Because you have Padraig sitting behind his desk reading today's Irish Times, and the captions are McManus led volunteer groups to build schools in Ghana, and the other caption is McManus leads 1 billion plus ESB acquisition of the Northern Ireland networks. Again, you may not be able to see at the back, but now you have the new Curra stand, and you have a few horses, I hope Padraig owns one of them, running in front of it. You also have, believe it or not, Ulysses, Joyce's book, sitting on the desk. You also have Padraig's wife, Mary, as a picture frame to make sure, whenever he's watching all that sport, that at least he can say that he definitely also keeps an eye on Mary. You also have his golf clubs, which he has a big love for, golf bag and golf clubs. And believe it or not, you also have Kildare, O'Neill's Gaelic football, showing his love of Kildare and GA. And then just to touch it up, to remind him of his ESB, Mincon, 3 logos and years. And finally you have a flag from Ghana saying, "Thank you from Ghana." I wouldn't want to say we couldn't let him go with a PKF-FPM vote.